And then of course, yes. And then some of them fully left. They're like, no, this is not. We only give bay'ah to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Are we live? Okay. And many of them. So just for the live viewers, we are spending today just kind of doing a little bit of a recap since we've kind of gone all the way back to the Battle of Yamama, and the Battle of Yamama will come next week. The false prophets. Yes, we talked about Tulayh al-Asadi. We talked about Musaylim al-Kadhab. We talked about Sajjah, the prophetess. So we saw that many people saw the success of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they thought to themselves, "Hold on, I could do that, right? I could claim to be a prophet. I could start to like spin up some verses." And so they tried, and many people followed them quickly. And the reason that many people followed them quickly is they promised these people, okay, follow me, and we're gonna win. And they took that, and those promises seemed credible, because hey, the Prophet ﷺ claimed to be a prophet. He promised that to his people. They rejected him, and he eventually won. So look, let's follow the business model that worked. The first person to come and try something might be rejected, and it's hard for him to do it. But now that he showed the success of it, people are trying to copy the business model. And there's an important lesson in that, which is that if the Prophet ﷺ's claim to prophethood was not true, then surely it would be replicable, right? The success of the Prophet ﷺ would indeed be replicable by other people's successes, right? Like we saw, for instance, any human success, whether Apple invents the computer or Uber invents ride-sharing, like there's always competitors that will come up and replicate the success, right? If it's a human endeavor, humans built this, other humans can succeed likewise. Well, if it's the Prophet ﷺ's success could not be replicated by these people. They achieved a very short-term little blip that got eliminated. And so one of the things we also discussed is, okay, like how did the Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu proceed against this crisis? Again, there was so much disagreement within the Sahaba. Umar and Abu Bakr were always, kind of at odds. And one of the things that, in hindsight, you kind of wonder why did he think this. Umar radiallahu anhu was against actually fighting those people who said, we're just going to not pay the zakat. So perhaps he felt that, there was enough enemies that went way beyond not just wanting to pay the zakat. Perhaps he felt that the speech of the Prophet ﷺ was what? He said, I was ordered to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah. This is hadith number 8 from the 40 Nawawi. I was ordered to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah, and then they're safe from me. And then they're safe from me. I'm not going to go ask more than that. Right? And so Umar said, look, these people said La ilaha illallah. They're not taking that back. So why should we continue fighting them? Why should we declare war on them? Right? And so Abu Bakr, he insisted to Umar, I'm not going to make a difference between prayers and between zakat. The shahada is not just, and there's an important thing to know, right? The shahada is not just the shahada. It is not just some speech. It is an acceptance of all of that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made fard, and a rejection of all of that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram. There's a misconception even among Muslims today that the one who simply says the shahada, because there's some ahadith that might give this impression, the one who simply just says it on the tongue is guaranteed paradise. And so the person feels like, I miss some prayers here, I do some haram there, I don't do my fard here, I don't. They feel, okay, well, as long as I am muwahid, I said the shahada, I'm all good, right? And this is a very blatant misunderstanding, because it totally disregards the idea of nifaq, right? Nifaq, of course, and I'm kind of going on a little bit of a tangent here, but nifaq happens when? Happens when somebody says the shahada and doesn't live up to it. Not out of weakness, but out of sort of treachery towards what he said. You said the shahada, you said La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, but you didn't really mean it, or you don't want to accept the full meaning of what that is. And that's different than accepting the full meaning of what that is and then falling short, which is just makes you a sinner, right? So Abu Bakr, like he showed in many different situations that he was really the right person to be the first one after the Prophet ﷺ to lead. Was he a better leader overall than Umar radiallahu anh? Maybe not, right? But there were specific qualities and characteristics that he had in terms of his ability to maintain the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ that made him necessary. And we saw, like in many situations, he took even a literalist approach to how the Prophet ﷺ, you know, governed his state. So, for instance, he kept all the same governors that the Prophet ﷺ appointed. He did no shuffling. He kept the same leader of the army, Osama bin Zayd, of the army that was going to Sham. He sent it to Sham just as the Prophet ﷺ ordered, even though arguably the order didn't make sense anymore. Because now the political situation is entirely different. And he didn't even justify his decision in any terms except this is what the Prophet ﷺ ordered, and I'm going to continue it. In the end, it turned out to be the right thing, because that show of force by sending that army to Sham while there was a civil war brewing, it showed strength. It showed that this is a civilization that still looks outwards, that is not bothered by this. And so it kind of projected a lot of strength and put terror into the hearts of the traitors among the Arabs. And we looked at the maps. I don't have them today, but essentially maybe like 60% of the population irtaddu, they apostated, and they left the civilization. And so one of the things that we understood is like, okay, why were the Muslims able to win? Not easily, but how are they able to win? How would you say? You guys remember? Yeah, it was the level of organization and communication. The Muslims out-organized, out-communicated. They led at a very high level. Abu Bakr was in contact with his armies through different carriers, such that he was receiving and giving updates and orders on a day-to-day basis. And that's not something that's easy to do without telecommunications. That's not something that's easy to do without messengers and or without like telegrams and stuff like that, right? Literally, this was just done by foot. But it was very important that Abu Bakr he maintained a certain presence on the battlefield, even though he was in Medina. This is somebody who wanted to be on the front lines, but his Sahaba had to convince him, like, look, things are really dangerous. We cannot afford to have Amir al-Mu'mineen out on the front lines. And so his communication was extremely high, and his level of organization. You have to remember, like, these apostates, they were disparate. They were apostating for different reasons. Some of them were fighting each other, right? Different false prophets couldn't come to agreements with each other. Different motivations came into the hearts of the disbelievers, whereas the believers were one motivation, one intention, one team, and that made the non-Muslims easy pickings. And we saw many situations whereby, like, the traitors, the ones who rebelled, the rebels, they quickly acquiesced to the Muslims. They quickly surrender because there's no cohesion to their force. It was mostly an opportunistic rebellion. Okay, so this is a very important lesson, which is the difference between a long-term conviction in a specific outcome, which is what the Muslims had, and then an opportunistic lashing out. Like, they saw opportunity, they saw dollar signs, and they're like, let's go get them. Where did they see the dollar signs? They saw, okay, look, some of them said, we only submitted to the Prophet ﷺ because what? Because he was the powerful guy. We couldn't do anything. We had to get on the ship before it left us. Get on the train before it left us. But now that the Prophet ﷺ is dead, they're like, oh, well, this is about to end. this is the end of this empire, so let's jump ahead now, seize what we can before we lose the opportunity to do so, before somebody else does, because this thing is going to end. So it was just a matter of like short-term thinking, opportunity. There was no cohesive vision here, right? And it shows you why the Arabs were never united until the Prophet ﷺ. He was the first one to unite the Arabs. Until then, the Arabs were always these little tribes who were always fighting each other, and even within the tribe there would be fighting, and the Romans would use some of them against the Persians would use some of them against the Romans. They were not a civilization that was taken seriously by anybody, right? And they lacked any kind of cohesive civilization. But the Muslims, when they had that, they easily subjugated everybody. Like they could keep the peninsula united, they could crush dissent, and keep things stable. Really. We spoke also about in terms of the Hurub al-Ridda. One of the main lessons. I mean, when we spoke about Musaylim al-Kadhab, we spoke about the foolishness of his revelation. We went over some of his verses, which showed the eloquence of the Quran is not something that has to necessarily like, the eloquence of the Quran is something that was immediately recognizable to the Arabs, such that when Musaylima, tried to spin his response to the Quran, it was something that was seen immediately by people as something laughable, as something worth mockery. And so people would laugh to each other. Even Musaylima's people would laugh about like, this is like some silly rhyming. It's not really serious Quran, or it's not serious claim to revelation. Whereas the Quran was entirely different. The Quran was, and maybe it's worth spending a little bit of time on this. The level of eloquence and comprehensiveness of subject matter that the Quran dealt with was immediately, perceptibly miraculous to the Muslims, to the Arabs at the time, right? Today, I think either we're a combination of, okay, we don't know the Arabic language, which is why some of us don't like see it right away, and number two is we're spoiled, or number three is we're ignorant because we don't recognize like simply the breadth of the subject matter that revelation that could not the breadth of the subject matter that could not have been covered by one man, right? This is a book of metaphysics, philosophy, law, spirituality, community, everything. Like you didn't leave anything out of this Quran in terms of how the human being should exist, with no contradiction, with no shortcoming. No one, and of course, all of that was done with the highest level of Arabic linguistic excellence, such that to this day nobody has produced any kind of document or produced any kind of research to show that, well, look, here's how the Quran could have been improved in these verses, or here's a better verse or better surah, as the Quran asks for. The Quran poses, for itself a challenge, right? I don't think there's no other revelation or prophetic claim that has a falsifiability criterion, whereby, okay, if you want to prove this wrong, here's how to do it. Produce a surah like it. And so the Quran did that, and nobody could do that until this day. And certainly the people who were most equipped to do that, which were the Quraysh of the time, could not do that. Okay? So, I was thinking about like an analogy of how to put this to Western people. It would be like if you had all of the top playwrights in England, like the Shakespeares and I don't know who else, but you had like, these top guys all living in one city, and then some merchant, some English merchant who has never written poetry in his life, never written a play in his life, he starts writing the best English literature that's ever been seen before, and it doesn't even follow the style of what has come before. It doesn't follow like Shakespeare style, it doesn't improve on it, doesn't innovate on it. It's a completely different category, which is again another aspect of the miraculousness of it and the lack of humanness of it. Because you would think that, whenever humans do anything well, it's always built on the shoulders of giants. It's always building off of what somebody else did before. But this was no, this was totally a new category of speech, of literature, which again shows the linguistic excellence and miraculousness of the Quran. So anyway, we went from that. We went from Abu Bakr quelling the apostates and now reuniting the peninsula. Immediately he looks outwards again, and he sends Khalid ibn al-Walid to Iraq. Iraq at this time is owned by the Persians, and he begins his rampage through Iraq essentially. And he's defeating Persian army after Persian army after Persian after Persian army after Persian army, and also Arabs who are allied, who have allied themselves with the Persians. And so the Persians are a different kind of fighting animal than the Arab. They are a civilization unlike the Arabs. They're very, they do have some cohesiveness, but one of their key faults is that they grossly underestimated the Muslims and Khalid ibn al-Walid in specific. And there were a few characteristics of Khalid ibn al-Walid which enabled him to win in situations where he was vastly outnumbered. Anybody know what those are? What would you say made Khalid win in vastly unfavorable conditions? That's one thing, yes. One thing is Khalid was an extremely ruthless executor of what needed to be done. He did not wait for he was not the guy to wait for tomorrow. He was the guy to always try to get the edge in on his enemy. When his enemy is sleeping, he's working. He's the kind of guy to be doing that. And actually, we saw that, in many situations whereby one of the early battles in Persia, the Arab Christians who were allied with the Persians, they had kind of ignored their commanders to, set up camp or set up defenses, and so they started having a party in their camp, right? So they're partying and they're having fun, and then the Muslim army just descends on them out of nowhere, right? So this is something that we see again and again. The Persians underestimated the Muslims, and the Muslims took advantage of that ruthlessly. The other characteristic of Khalid bin Walid is that he was extremely innovative and risk-taking. If you're outnumbered and outgunned and outmatched, you cannot try to win by playing the game normally. You have to play the game in a way that creates some kind of asymmetry. And one of the ways he would do, he would do that in multiple different ways in multiple different battles. We talked about one battle in which he runs up to the enemy front unexpectedly, and he scoops up the enemy commander in his arms, and he runs back to his own lines. And he literally just kidnapped the guy. And so the enemy army surrenders, and then he basically goes and he sieges the fortress, and he takes the enemy army as prisoner. The enemy fortress won't open up. He tells them, if you don't open up, we're going to slaughter these prisoners. And they don't open up, so they kill the prisoners. And then they still get into they siege the town. And this was the story where they found the monastery with 40 young Christians. There's 40 young Christians in a monastery, kids, who are just doing Bible practice. And so the Muslim army was ordered, not to harm them, but they were taken back to Medina because after this place was conquered. And many of these guys actually became ancestors of some very famous Muslim scholars. So fathers or grandfathers of some famous Muslim scholars came out of this 40. Now, I guess not to be unexpected because, they were kind of studying to be scholars in one sense. They became scholars in one sense, or their children did at least. They had the genetics for it. So Khalid did such a good job in Iraq that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wanted him for Sham, because this was really Abu Bakr's main ambition, was to take over Sham, to get into Palestine, right? And to get Al-Quds, and to get, Masjid al-Aqsa, and to push the Romans out. And the Prophet ﷺ, he gave multiple prophecies about Romans and Rome and Constantinople, and the Muslims, since the beginning, wanted to actualize these prophecies. And so he sent. We spoke. This is now the most recent stuff we were talking about. He sent. What was his name? So another general by the name of Khalid, not Khalid ibn al-Walid, and he went and he did his first foray into the Roman territory, and we found out that the Romans have a few differences. They have a few differences from the Persians. One of them, they're not underestimating the Muslims, probably because of the reputation that they've gotten. Second one is that the Romans are not impulsive. The Romans actually allowed Muslims to come into their territory unimpeded, just to kind of trap them. And so when the Muslims realized what was happening, they pulled back their armies and they united back at Yarmouk. Okay, now Yarmouk is going to become the scene for the main confrontation that would decide the fate of the Muslims or the fate of the Romans in Sham. Until now, it's been skirmishes, it's been lesser battles. Now things are really going to shape up in Yarmouk. So we went through some of the prelude to Yarmouk, the negotiations that were taking place, the famous one of the Roman commanders who converts to Islam on the field, and he comes back with the Muslims. And this is actually what starts the battle, because when he comes back with the Muslims, and they're in the middle of the field talking, one of them converts to Islam, and they come back. The other side thinks that this guy got kidnapped. The commander got kidnapped, so they're like, "Oh shoot, they took our commander. We have to go fight." And that's where really we left off. Okay, and that's what we're going to continue next week. But we can leave the rest of the session. Maybe today will be a shorter session for question and answer. Any parts of the history so far that we would like to review, or questions about even just the political reality or the Islamic reality of governance, of anything really. So if there's anything we want to discuss, let me know. Yeah, yeah. So those were the main ones. The appointment of the leader, Osama bin Zayd, um, and then attacking Sham, dealing with the apostates the way he dealt with them. Also, his decision to go into to attack Sham in full force now. So there's the first army that went, which was Osama bin Zayd's army. It only went for a really kind of small expedition. It did some raids. It didn't have any major battles, and it came back. This was before the apostasy wars. Now, after the apostasy wars and after Iraq, now Abu Bakr is mulling whether or not to go and fight. And he decides he wants to go and open up a second front, really, because now there was a front with the Persians, and he wants to open up a front with the Romans. So this one wasn't so controversial, but there was some disagreement about how to proceed. Like, should we go right in and all full force, or should we kind of do a more protracted campaign? The different Sahaba had different opinions. He heard them out, and he decided to go full force, and send a bigger army. But I'm trying to think in my head, was there anything else that was an unpopular decision? I mean, okay, yes, there was another one, which was compiling the Quran. This was right after the Battle of, you guys know? Yamama, exactly. This was the fight against one of the false prophets during the apostasy wars. Many of the memorizers of the Quran died. And this kind of created a little bit of a concern with the Muslims that, people right now who memorize the Quran are going to be dying. And how is the Quran going to be preserved for future generations? So the Quran had already been written down, but it was never compiled in one place. Like, you have a page here, this guy has a page there. some pages there. And so what happened is that Abu Bakr assembled a task force to collect all of this stuff, to authenticate it with memorizers to make sure that all of it was correct and nothing was written down wrong or nothing was said wrong. Basically, make sure there is that mass transmission reliability. And this was not, something that everybody agreed on in specific. Um, sorry, Abu Bakr did not agree on doing this. So this is an opposite kind of thing, where Abu Bakr did not want to do this, but some of the Sahaba around him had to push him until they convinced him to do it. Um, and the reason why he didn't want to do it, you know why? Yeah, Prophet ﷺ didn't do it. So he's like, again, this is how Abu Bakr thinks, right? It's very simple, but it works it works, right? Like most of the time. But sometimes, you have to make an ijtihad. You have to make a judgment based on a new reality. Even though the Prophet ﷺ didn't, doesn't mean that we don't do it, right? There's lots of things we wouldn't be doing, right? So it was the right thing to do, and Uthman radiallahu anhu after him, so 2 khilafas later, Uthman is the one who consolidates the Muslims upon one version of the Quran. Because as you guys know, there were 7, do you guys know about the 7 ahruf and the 10 qira'at? Okay, so just a quick review. When the Quran was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed not just the Quran that we know, but also revealed different dialects for different kinds of Arab tribes for them to understand it. Alright? So it was the same Quran, it was just in a different dialect, kind of like translations. But they were all revelation. So those were sent out to the different tribes so that people could go teach them and they could learn the Quran. But after the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and then Umar and now Uthman and the Sahaba felt the need to unite the Ummah upon one harf, one dialect, which was the Qurashi dialect, which is the Quran that we know today. And so these other ahruf were phased out. And that was the unanimous decision of the Sahaba. So, do you know, should I review what Ijma' Sahaba is? Do you know what Ijma' Sahaba is? Okay, so this is an important thing maybe we should have covered from the beginning, because Ijma' Sahaba means consensus of the companions. And this is something the scholars use as an evidence for whether something is halal or haram or fard or not. Right? Meaning, and there's usually 4 basic sources of legislation: the Quran, the Sunnah, Qiyas, which is analogical reasoning from one situation to another situation. Like, we know that alcohol is haram for this reason, and so we can say that heroin is haram for the same reason, even though heroin didn't show up in the Quran. And then Ijma' Sahaba. Ijma' Sahaba meaning every Sahabi unanimously agreed upon a thing. This tells us that that they understood something from Islam, perhaps that didn't reach us, like a hadith, for instance, that enabled them to agree all on one position, and that position is binding upon us. If one Sahabi has one opinion about something, that's not a binding legislative opinion on us. We can say, okay, that was his opinion, this is my opinion. But when they're united, that is binding. No one can come and disagree with that. And so one of the things that they united upon was prioritizing the appointment of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu as Khalifa over the burial of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So from that we understand that appointing a Khalifa is not just fard, but it was even more fard, more obligatory than burying somebody, let alone the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the fastest time that you can. So they delayed that for this. We also have here that they had consensus upon phasing out these different ahruf, phasing out these different dialects in favor of the Qurashi dialect, right? So the 10 qira'at is something different. The 10 qira'at is something we have to this day. Qira'at are different ways to recite the Quran that sometimes have different meanings, subtly different meanings. But overall, the lettering of the Quran and the different qira'at is the same. It's all the same lettering. Whereas the ahruf were more different. There's more different lettering and different wording because it's different dialects. So yeah, so that was another thing that the Abu Bakr had a disagreement with his inner circle about, but eventually they came to that agreement. Any other things we should discuss? Yeah, yeah. He didn't want. I don't think he wanted to leave everyone be. He wanted to leave. There are some people who are willing to stay loyal, willing to stay, pray the prayers and so on, but we won't pay the zakat. So why did Abu Bakr insist upon fighting these people? Well, it's rebellion. You can't just say, I'm not going to pay the zakat. If you're my subject and you gave me the oath of allegiance, it's not up to you to decide what you want to obey me in and what you don't want to obey me in. Then next year you're going to tell me you don't want to do this. Next time I give you a command, it's ala kayfik, on your own discretion. You're going to obey it or not. You can't tolerate that as a leader. So that's one. It's just from a basic leadership perspective. You let someone get away with one thing, they're going to get away with everything. The second thing is that it was not up to Abu Bakr in his mind. It was not his decision, because from his perspective, these people were going to change the deen by accepting part of the deen and rejecting other part of the deen. And if Abu Bakr allowed that, then he would be changing the deen. If I allow people, if I don't enforce the zakat upon my people, then I'm changing the deen, because Islam revealed all these laws for us to enforce that are obligatory upon us to enforce, and we have to enforce them. So from his perspective again, like, it was not his decision, it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's legislation. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever doesn't legislate by what Allah has revealed, these are the kafirun. So again, he felt that as well. And finally, and this is probably not even that big of a motivator, but the zakat is something that, is important for the ummah to, for all of its different use cases. So it's not some minor thing. It's one of the pillars of Islam as well. It's one of the symbols of Islam. And yeah, it was really a no-brainer. Maybe now it's easy to say it's a no-brainer, but back then it was more contentious. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah. Okay, okay. Uh, oh yeah? Okay. Okay, okay. Okay, thank you, thank you. Jazakallah khair. Yeah. Other questions? No? Okay. Yeah, today was more of just a recap, and then next week we'll go right into the the sequence of battle in the Battle of Yarmouk. So you're pretty much caught up now. جزاكم الله خير والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم.